All right, looks like I'm up and running. So, hey everybody, it's Jason from Ronin Bodyboards. Doing another Boog Chat tonight. Looks like we got 3 people here already. That's kind of cool. Thanks for showing up, guys. Whoever's out there, like I said, it's an open chat. So anybody's got any questions or whatever, just throw them in the chat window and ask away. Got a few topics. Hey Nick, good to see you. And I might see you actually in person this week, is the rumor, or about a week from now or so. So pretty excited about you seeing you, meeting you in Sterling. That's pretty cool. Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, we need to talk more about the details, but we don't need to do that here. I mean, we can talk that through Instagram or whatever. But I mean, hey, if you want to talk about it now, that's fine too. Really excited. Maybe we can get into a surf too if you guys are around and have the time to get in the water when you're here in town. Yeah, pretty amped to meet you guys. So pretty cool. Pretty cool. You guys are coming up and going through the coast. I don't know whether you guys are driving all the way up Highway 1 or you're going to go 101. But yeah, I mean, Highway 1's a beautiful drive if you got the time. It just takes a little more time to get up the coast versus taking the 101 up to Santa Cruz. So yeah, either way is pretty awesome. I mean, but obviously Highway 1 and going through Big Sur's just an epic drive. Yeah, I figured it's probably 101. That's really the quickest way to get up there. So, but getting over to Morro Bay is a little detour, so you're gonna have to detour off and then get back to the 101 to get to Morro Bay. But yeah, it's only a 20-minute or half-hour detour kind of out and around. But as far as driving time goes, yeah, stoked to see you guys. We'll work out the details. Anyhow, gosh, I've been surfing my brains out the last week. I think I've had 6 sessions in the last 7 days. So, and today I couldn't go. It was freaking just gigantic up here. It was, pretty much unpaddleable. Couldn't really make the paddle pretty much anywhere around here. There's a few guys trying, but nobody really getting it done. It was just that first big swell of the year. It's around here, especially if it's too west, it's just straight onto the beaches. There's just like, well overhead closeouts. It's a hell paddle out there around here, these parts, when it gets like that. First few swells, so much sand gets sucked off the beaches here. It's incredible to see how all the sand go, and then all the sandbars form up. But it usually takes a storm or two for that to happen. So yeah, I've been out there a bunch, catching a bunch of waves. Been riding pretty much only riding the 420 board. I'm finally the all green board. I've been riding pretty exclusively over the last month now. So I'm really loving the board. It's great. It's going great. It's a 3 to 6, and got a step deck, a little bit more volume. And I noticed that volume actually when I was surfing at the Rock, and it was a pretty big overhead day. It's probably the fastest I've been on that board yet because it was pretty big wave. So I was really, really hauling butt down the line. I went to go for a big turn, and it seemed like it was a little bit more on the surface, and I wasn't sinking into the water as much as I do on some of my other boards. Maybe it was just because there's a little bit more volume. And then I went into a turn, and when I would normally be able to sink my rail and really just lock in a turn and hit it, it almost like it was almost starting to side slip and skip out on me a little bit. And I don't know whether it's me just have to get used to a little bit more volume in my board and being able to sink the rail in a little bit more. But I was definitely, I'm just getting used to it. Every board's just a little bit different. Even if I try to make a board to the same specs as the previous board, it's always going to have a little bit different feel. And you're always used to a broken in board at that point too, versus something that's brand new. So it's always going to have a little bit different feel, an old board versus a new board. But there's nothing like a nice fresh board. It's an amazing feeling. Anyhow, enough about me and what I've been surfing. I hope everybody else been out there has been scoring some waves, because I know it's winter time is pretty much getting into full effect. And there's I know Hawaii's been getting waves and California's been getting waves. So hope everybody out there has been scoring some waves. Maybe we'll just get into the custom boards, the history of kind of my custom boards and how they've evolved over the years. And I've been doing this over the last few Boog Chats where I go over some of the boards that I've had in the past and how they've evolved. So I have a few boards. I definitely have a few boards behind me here. So I think I had this one out last time, and it was kind of maybe where I left off with the history of the custom board. So this is one of the first ones where I've had the full contours, like I put on a lot of my Ronin boards and all my own personal custom boards, where it has the elbow contours and the hip stuff out the tail. And we talked a lot about that, about how anywhere where you grab now is you got a nice thumb groove over here, and you really got elbow, so your elbow doesn't slip off the edge of the rail. So that's kind of one of the benefits of having a full contour all the way through the rail is anywhere where you grab, some boards just have a line or something and just palm contours up here. I mean, that's great. I mean, but that's only spots for these two spots, right? Like what happens if your hand is here, or what happens if sometimes I'll drop my hand way back by the tail too, depending on the situation and turns. It just depends on where my hand is, so why wouldn't you want to contour all the way through the rail line? So anywhere where you grab, you get that positive thumb wrap over the rail. That's one of the huge ones for me. It always was. So anyway, I've been over this one before. It's single concave V-tail. Deck contours. This one has the V stringers also, so it goes from the tip of the tail to the center of the board, and that it's 2-stringer system. So yeah, like I said, we've been over this board last time. I always like to recap kind of where I left off. So that one was a little bit bigger though. It was a 43-inch board, and I was starting to feel, or maybe it was 42 and a half. I haven't measured it out in a while. It's either 42 or 43 and a half. It's a little bit longer. It's a little bit wider than some of the previous boards I had. So and right after this board, it's about the time that I started working at the tubes factory. That board, the yellow one I just showed you, I actually did the contours on in the shop. It was like one of the first boards I ever really got to work on with my own hands in the shop at the tubes factory. But I didn't really work there yet. They just let me come in and do some of the deck contours on the board, and then the other shapers there finished it out. And did all the laminations and all the rails, and I never really touched it after doing the deck contours. But between that board and then the next board, actually, that's about the time when I got hired on, and I had the tubes factory to start coming in and helping out and doing boards. And then after that's when I actually really got to start making my own boards, pretty much from start to finish. Now, there was one other board that I had that also that I got to make that I don't have anymore. I left it underneath the house that I was staying on the North Shore. So it's somewhere over on the North Shore. Well, we'll get into that in a little bit, but so that board, the one I was just talking about, but this one is one of the very first boards that I ever really made for myself at the tubes factory. So it's basically V-tail, single concave. It has cross-link bumpers on it too. So all the boards from here on out have bumpers too. Like all my personal boards will have bumpers from this point out. Some of the real early ones didn't even have bumpers. They were just the skins were wrapped over, and you didn't get that extra layer of foam and extra padding for impact damage and stuff. Bumpers are huge for that, and they help keep water out and solve some of the dissimilar material issues that you have. So I love this board, man. I think this might have been one of the first boards I really started mastering spinning on. I went from that yellow board that was kind of big to this one that's only 41 and a half. It's kind of dusty. I haven't had this one out in a while, so it's a little bit dusty, as you see. But I really started learning how to spin on this board because it was smaller. That other board, that was the first time I ever been to. Maybe the second time I've been to Hawaii to bodyboard was on the yellow one. And rode it at Pi. I wanted it a little bit bigger because I knew the waves were a little more power. I just wanted a little more board when I went to Hawaii. But once I got back home, and I was like, man, this board, it's kind of big. So I wanted to go in kind of the opposite direction and go maybe just a hair smaller on my next board. And that's what this one was. And once I got this board, man, I could just feel my riding evolve on this board. There was something about it that my riding went to the next level. And maybe it's because I built it. I mean, I really don't know, but it might be a factor. That's the first board I actually got to build from start to finish for myself. I mean, I built some other boards and had my hands touch some other boards in the factory for other people, but this is the first one I really got to build start to finish for myself. So, like I said, I learned how to spin on this board. There's something about it. It's a little bit shorter. It's a little bit narrower than the yellow one. And dimensionally, I don't know how it compares. I need to really measure it out. I don't think I've ever really taken the specs off this board, but it's probably pretty similar to some of the boards I'm riding these days, maybe just a hair shorter and maybe just a hair narrower. But everything else out about it's really, really similar to except for obviously the Scout tails I'm doing these days. But I just love this board, man. It was such a good board. I could just feel the evolution of my riding. It's still no mesh though, and if I remember right, this still does have a V stringer, a double V stringer in it. So I kind of always rode double V stringers and single concave V tails. That was my thing. No nose bulbs on this one, oddly enough, even though some of the previous ones did. Somehow this, I think because when I was making it, I was just barely learning how to shape. I just skipped some of the little details about it. So yeah, that's the next one in the chain. Hey, looks like we're up to 5 people. Hey, if anybody, thanks for showing up, guys. I really appreciate it. If anybody's got any questions, fire away. You guys can interrupt me with questions anytime you want, and I'll do my best to answer whatever people want to talk about. And then, so when I was in the shop a little bit, at the tubes factory, there was always kind of like a blem pile of core that was always kind of like maybe misshaped throughout the history, and so they just took a piece of core and threw it off into the corner and reshaped a board. So when I was starting to learn there at tubes how to shape, Buzz would say, "Hey man, just go pick something out of that pile and laminate some skins on it and just practice some of the skills." It was pretty cool just to walk back there and start cycling through some of the blem pieces of core that had been kind of misshaped and trying to figure out if I could make a board out of it. And one of the ones that really stuck out to me in that pile was there was a black P. It was one of the first piece of black PP cores I'd ever seen. And what happened was it was a Hurley model, and that's what the core is on this board. But it was a Hurley model that somebody had shaped out all the rails, but then went to do the channels on it, and they sanded the channels into the deck instead of the bottom side of the board. So they just like, okay, we're not going to mess with this, and they just threw it off to the side. Well, I looked at it, and I'm like, well, hey, that just those channels on the deck side just basically look like hip contours to me. Hip and thigh contours in the board. So I was like, well, shoot, I think I could probably just finish that out and then do a single concave V-tail on it. And that's kind of what this, so that's what this is. I took it, I got if people know the history of tubes, this is also the Malig's, Kyle Maligros stamps that they had. So I finished it out. That's what this is it basically has standard channels sanded into the deck of the board, but it's a full Hurley model. I want to say it's a 42 or 43. It's not super big, but it's got the nose, the typical nose rocker that we put into the Hurleys and whatnot. And I've ridden it a little bit, and I've done a little bit of DKing on it and whatnot. But I didn't really ride this board much because I'm not much of a DKer. I was pretty much a prone rider, but this is definitely one I'm stoked to have in my quiver and just be able to. And like I said, it's a black PP core as well, so that was kind of cool. I want to say it's a triple stringer too, because most of the Hurleys were all triple stringers. So it's a triple stringer, single concave V-tail. With some pretty deep hip grooves that were supposed to be channels in the bottom that ended up in the deck. So, this is a pretty cool board. I'm pretty stoked to have a Hurley in my collection, because it's such a popular board in the tubes. I think it's been one of their biggest sellers forever and a day. So, I'd say probably around the time I finished that board is also the time that I took that motherboard to Hawaii. And it was a PE core 10, I want to say. It was not a 10. It was it was a tubes 10 with a gull wing tail. Because I'd been making all of a sudden I was getting in the shop and get exposed to some other tail designs, and I was like, wow, I'd made a few gull wing tails. And I see your question, Andrew. And I really liked how the gull wing tail fit against my hips and thighs. It's really similar to a bat tail. A bat tail, though, is more vertical. The cuts on it are more like straight up and down. And the gull wing is the same, kind of the same bat tail profile, but it's laid back into the board at an angle, the whole tail. So, but once you put that against your hips, it felt really good, kind of like a bat tail, how it kind of locks you in. But it still has that center bump that was a ball crusher. That's the thing. I built that board, and I rode it a little bit around here. It was a PE core. It was the only PE core board I've ever had in my own quiver. All my boards are PP. So I rode it around here. It rode okay, but I just remember I was down at the Rock and hit a big lip hit, and then came down and just crushed myself. Man, that center bump just wrecked me, and I was kind of an eye opener. I'm like, oh no, I can't do this anymore. That bump's no good. Even though it locks you into your tail, your hips into the tail, it's just that center bump on a bat. It's just, at least for me, is no good. But I still took that board to Hawaii, but I knew I wasn't going to ride it much, so I just left it with the lady that I had stayed with over in Hawaii for her grandkids and stuff to ride, and I just left it there. And then I want to say I took that the yellow bottom board that I just showed you. That was I took those two boards with me to Hawaii on that trip, or maybe even the yellow board. I'm not sure, but anyway, that was a long time ago. It was well over 10 years ago. So anyway. then once I got into the shop and started getting evolving some of the things that I was doing in there, I was, starting to experiment with some other designs of stuff, and I was also getting exposed to some other materials. So the bumper materials, that's when I started. I learned about the EPP deck skin backing, or what they call black magic, or sometimes deck deck skin and stuff. So that's when I started incorporating all that. From here on out, I started using all those deck skin backings and stuff on all the boards I was making at the factory, at the tubes factory, and for all my personal boards. So from here on out, you'll start to notice that all the bumpers changed from a white to a black, and that's because the material changed. Anyway, Andrew, real quick, have I ever had sealed air deck skins with filmed backing? No, I think you can only buy sealed air skins. We talked a little bit about skins last week. The difference between the stuff that I get from overseas and the stuff I can get domestically here in the United States. So the stuff I get here in the United States doesn't come with the filmed backing. When the filmed backing is like a hot melted kind of adhesive that's back to one side of the skin, and then you can stick the PE skins to PE cores or PEP deck skin backing without having any problems, because that stuff sticks together. But no, I don't think sealed air does film backings on their skins. You got to do that after the fact, and I'm lucky I can be able to do that on my laminator. So I know certain laminators can do it, and then certain ones can't. So it really is a big step to be able to do your own hot melted coatings on the backs of certain skins. It's a huge hurdle to get over with the building process. So good question, Andrew, but I don't think people realize a lot of the stuff like that goes in. You obviously you do, but there's a lot of people out there that what I just said might be a little bit over their head. But maybe if you watch enough of these Boog Chats, and we've talked about the material sandwiches and all the different materials that go within a board, you might kind of put the pieces together what I'm talking about. Alexander, you're asking about. He's asking what my PP core is from which manufacturer. My PP core that I buy is all made by USA made by a company called AR Plank. They're out of the Midwest, and that's actual manufacturer that manufactures the PP core that I use. But it's really tough to crack into their chain of stuff. Usually you have to buy from a distributor. You can't usually buy direct from AR Plank unless you're buying massive quantities. That's the big thing about all these materials, is you can't buy one piece of a core. I've talked a little bit about this before, is that the PP core comes in big, huge blocks, and then multiple pieces are cut out of those blocks by the distributors, and then I buy from the distributor. So I put in an order, and then I have to order in those big blocks. Each block I have to pay for, and then they'll cut those blocks up in whatever sizes and thicknesses I want. So that's kind of the process of how the PP core comes from the manufacturer to a distributor, and then it's cut up, and then it's sent to me. AR Plank doesn't cut pieces to size; they just make the big blanks. What do you? Sicko, what do I think about a full channel from the bottom of the nose for the DK, a nice reliable edge? So yeah, I mean, if you're talking about the bottom, like maybe a single concave through the whole bottom, for DK, a lot of guys like a single to a double concave. I've done quite a few DK boards that have a single to double concave. I just think having maybe a little bit of a center rib in there helps with the tracking a little bit. If you just did a single concave all the way through a board, I mean, it's going to hold as soon as you put that thing over on rail and you start to sit a little bit back on the tail. That's going to definitely hold better than a flat bottom board or a standard channel board, just because the channel goes, your concave goes further up into the board, and when you get over on rail, it's going to hold, and it's not going to side slip. It's going to bite a little bit better. But taking it all the way up through the nose is fine. I can do that. I can take that concave all the way up through what we call the nose cut, right? So let's pull out that curve real quick here. Because this is like I said, this is a single. This one has a single concave. You can kind of see, if you were to put a straight edge across this, how it definitely has a single concave. But this single concave, when at the tubes factory, I was a little bit limited. I could only sand, because of how the sanding jig worked and how they did the channels there. Wasn't hand shaped. It was still done off of this weird little drill with a drum a sanding drum on it. So that's how all my older tubes boards were all done on this sanding jig that they had at the tubes factory. You could really do channels faster than hand shaping them for sure. So on a manufacturing scale, it definitely was better to have that skill. But you can only imagine but now that I'm hand shaping all my channels, I can do anything. I can take, this one probably only goes up into about mid part of the board, the concave. But if you took that all the way up through the whole front part of the nose, that what it's going to do is it's going to bite. It's going to bite really hard. So, you're definitely you're going to have less side slip. But it won't be the best spinning board ever either too, because, that's one of there's always going to be a positive and a negative to any kind of situation, is that, as soon as you take that channel all the way up through the front part of the board, when you go to start to spin, it's not going to be as loose in the front half of the board. Now, if you're not worried about spinning, you just need your board to hold when you're leaning forward and driving, then it might be something to look at for sure. So hope that answers your question there, Sicko. Adam, have you ever done a custom leash? I'm guessing you said leash plug that goes in halfway so you don't have to put the. Yes, I have. So he's asking about a leash plug, whether Sponge Res actually has their own little. If you know the brand Sponge Res, they do some it's like a shoe gooey material that's used for repairs, but they also have a leash plug installation kit that I've done on a couple boards. I think I actually have. That's it right here. I'm not promoting any brands, but I have done this, and I have my buddy Jim who actually does all my screen printing and does all the use salty stuff too. He swears by this leash and this leash plug. And so basically, I'm not trying to promote this, but I'm just saying I've installed a couple of them. You can buy them off Amazon, or you can go to the Sponge Res website. And so what you can do this, and you just have to hog out, and it's like a plug that puts in the top, and it Sponge Reses in. And my buddy Jim swears by them, and so that way you're not going all the way through the board. And then the Sponge Res stuff actually seals the hole up really good on the top side of the deck of the board. So it's something to look at if you guys are curious about another type of a leash thing. Now if you're talking about my buddy Jim, he rides the wave pool in Texas a lot, and he doesn't go out in super heavy conditions, so I'm not sure. But this thing has some pretty crazy ways where those little mechanical things that as you twist it in, it'll bite into the foam, so you'll get even more resistance to pulling it out. So in a real heavy situation, I don't know, I can't speak for that, how good it's going to be when the waves get serious. So it might pull out in certain situations versus something that goes all the way through. But this is another one that's something to look at. Andrew, you've noticed that some shapers do a push method with their knives and others do a pull method. Can you explain the differences? Well, it's all comes down to personal preference on what feels right to you as a shaper. There's no right or wrong as long as the cut is good. And ultimately, if you just make the right cut and it's accurate and you didn't mess anything up, it also comes down to the knife you're using. I know you see a lot of shapers use different styles of knives. I mean, I use one style of knife, and I know you know the knife I'm talking about, Andrew. But it's a thin type of a razor knife. I mean, I'll show you what it looks like. I use one knife for every step, whether it's cutting sirloin or skin or anything. I mean, I really use this, and this is the knife I use. So, it's super thin. It's like a razor knife. You can sharpen it a million times. This is the second one I've used in 500 boards. The first one lasted over 400 boards, almost 400 boards. So, and I still use it. It's just a B knife now. I've actually broke out a new one recently because I actually dropped that one and lost it underneath a cabinet in the shop, and I couldn't find it. So I was really bummed because this is my favorite knife. I built hundreds of boards with that knife, and I thought I lost it. So I had to get a new one out. And so I started using the new one. I was like, man, this thing cuts amazing compared to the old one. So I've been using this one as my main knife. And I use the other one for, like, if I'm cutting rail pieces or cutting tail pieces or doing some other stuff, I do that. But if I'm making cuts on a board, I have a newer one now. I have a stack of these things. And other people use other types of knives. I've seen use kind of almost like a kitchen style knife, or sometimes you'll see some of these style knives with the handle on it. But when the handle kind of gets in the way for certain cuts. And that gets to the push-pull method. So when you're pulling it, you're going to be pulling the blade towards you versus taking it and pushing it away from you. So I don't know. You can't really do some certain cuts if there's a handle on it and you're pushing it away from you. I mean, I don't know. I was just taught to pull when I cut. That's just the way I was taught, and that's the way I've always done it. So, and there might be certain times when I push for small cuts, but all of the major cuts I do on a board, I pull, and this is the knife I use. So, any ways possible. There's lots of options, but that's the one that I use. Yeah, Nick says he's been proning a little bit on his 3 to 6 channel. It's funny because I jump up on my prone board all the time. That's a 3 to 6, and not all the time, but I do it every once in a while. I definitely will jump up and do some DKing on my prone board, but I really like proning on my tombstone a little bit more because I'm not a big DKer. So when the waves get serious, I'm not going to be DKing. I'm definitely prone riding. So. Hey, Thrusty. Good to see you. I'd imagine that's probably Dom. So good to see you, Dom. Glad you made it. Sicko, yeah. LNMOP boards. Yeah, I don't think I've ever ridden. I've held maybe 1 or 2 LNMOP boards, but I've never ridden one. So they looked okay, and they're all right. Got nothing bad to say about it just because I don't have much experience about that particular brand. Andrew's asking what's the most boards I've ever ran through my laminator at once. Well, like I said, probably this batch of boards I'm doing right now. I have 10, and I laminated all 10 at once, and that's maybe pushing it a little bit for my laminator. So yeah, I'd say about 10. I don't like building more than that in one batch. I like to be in that 3 to 5 range of boards built in a batch. But this batch, it's busy times. It's always the busiest time of the year. It's historically like from October till February. It's just the winter months are always the time when I get slammed with orders, and my batch numbers just seem to climb up, and I'm building more boards at once. It's just the nature of the seasons. So yeah. Maybe I'll try to keep going a little bit more. I have 1 or 2 more boards I still want to get through. We're only about halfway through. So once I got into the tube shop, I started having, I'm a crazy, my mind is crazy. I'm always looking for something. And I've talked a little bit about how I thought about how the V stringers for a prone situation, it's like the transfer of energy is better at least back then. The transfer of energy from the nose you're pulling up on to the opposite corner is super big. And if you have a single stringer, what the board does is it radially flexes. It like twists around that center stringer, right? When you pull up here, it takes a while for all that energy to transfer up to the opposite point, because of the nature of how the board flexes. But if it's in a V pattern, you're pulling up here, it's like more of a direct transfer from the corner you're grabbing on to the opposite point of the tail. Because that's what you're doing, is you're basically pulling up on that corner to be able to turn, and that transfers down to the opposite point of the energy. So that concept to me always I was always curious about what could be played around with that. And so I came in one day, I got talking with Buzz. I'm like, hey man, I know the surfboard manufacturers have been using carbon fiber in their boards a lot for like reinforcements of rails and certain sections of surfboards and stuff. And I was like, it might be fun to kind of play around with some of the carbon fiber stuff that's out there that for surfboards, like the fiberglass cloth that has carbon fiber strips through it. So I went out and found a local surfboard supply place and got some of this. Maybe I got the roll still. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Yep, still got the roll. It's right here. So you can see this is like a roll of fiberglass tape that has carbon fiber strips through it. So I went out and I got a roll of this stuff at the surfboard supply place, and so this board. What we did, I wish I had some pictures I could show you guys, but you can get the gist of what it is. Is that I shaped out the core to all my specs. And I know, so this board is probably one of the next ones in the evolution. It's got all my normal contours on it, and a V-tail, single concave, right? This one's just a single stringer. I think I did put a single stringer up through this. But so what happened on this is I took and routed out, once I got the core shape before I had any skins on it, you can see this big X pattern basically that's through the board. I took and inlaid this fiber tape into the core of this board. So there's an X pattern of this carbon fiber in the core of this board. And so then I epoxied all that into the core, and then inlaid more polypropylene back into over top of that strips, like the same material as what the core would be, right? So we're all working inside the core. There's no skins on this board yet. So there's a carbon fiber X that basically runs through this board, that from nose to tail. So it's also doing that same thing where we're talking about the transfer of energy from this point of the nose to this opposite point of the tail. And you can see this board, I kind of got creative with some Sharpies and stuff. And it also has pretty much all the spots I've ridden it too right here. So, there's, Rincon, Ventura Point, Cayucas Pier, and all the local spots around here. Pretty much I rode this board. So I rode this board some pretty cool places. It didn't make it to Hawaii with me, but, and it's dated. I built this in 2016. So that's, a few years back, but I know I put this X on the board, and I know Custom X was a little bit bummed. I think they had a message in Pat or Buzz at Tubes and said, "Hey, what's up with that X on the board?" I got a little feedback, negative feedback from those guys. It was no disrespect. I love the guys at Custom X. They're amazing. Debbie, Pete, and all the gang down there are amazing. So, and JoJo, yeah, great crew. I would never do anything to disrespect their brand or anything like that. It was more about the carbon fiber X thing. And so, yeah, it was kind of fun. So I did some little artwork on this and whatnot, but it was a fun board, and it's probably still way rideable. I just, I'm not riding these boards that much anymore. But this board, you can also notice that it's one of the first boards I probably made also with the black PP bumpers versus the cross link that we've done previously. So this is one of the first ones that really had that deck skin backing all the way through the deck, and then the bumpers. It's one of the very first ones I probably did like that. And then, right after that, this is one of the another board that evolved, back to the normal. But this board is maybe one of the first ones I did with mesh too. So I don't know if you can see it on here, but this is like one of the first boards I really had with slick mesh. Finally talked to the guys at the Tubes factory to start letting me make mesh boards, because they were kind of anti it because they had some lamination issues with it. But I really saw a benefit to doing mesh bottoms on boards. So as far as the how that one rode, Sicko, you're asking about the X board and how it rode. It definitely had an interesting pop, and I think over time, it didn't have the same snap and pop as I kind of hoped it would have, but it had an interesting flex to it. I like I said, I rode it all kinds of different conditions and point breaks and reef breaks and stuff around here. So, I really enjoyed the board. It definitely rode well. I had really nothing bad to say about it at all. But it's the only one I've ever built like that, because it was pretty labor intensive to inlay, shape the core out and then router all the stuff out and epoxy all that stuff in, and then I still cut a stringer through the whole thing. So there was a lot going on with that board, just before I could even laminate skins on it. So it's not something I'd probably do these days for people. It was just a kind of a prototype experimental thing, and I was lucky enough that the guys at the factory would let me play around with ideas like that. And Buzz was always looking for something new and something cool to do with stringer systems. So it was a real easy sell to him to try to talk about, hey, we should do this, and all right, let's do it. So very grateful for them letting me experiment on stuff like that. So anyway, this is one, like I said, this is one of the first boards with mesh, nose bulbs, V-tail, still V-tail, single concave. I really hadn't gotten into putting ribs through the bottom, even though by this point I'd probably seen a few of the Mez quads and whatnot, but I really hadn't started experimenting for myself with multi-channel designs. And I was still, this has been the first few years of me even learning how to shape. So, just making a board to this quality was pretty cool, man. This one, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this board. It has miles on it, but it's still a really good board. Yeah, and you also, this might be one of the very first ones. I mean, you can see maybe the influence, some of the stamping on the bottom of this, and how I stamp some of my Ronin boards these days. But this was nobody. I mean, there was maybe a couple boards I'd done that maybe had a stripe through it at the tubes factory with the alternating tubes, the logos like this. But you can see where how that evolved in some of the stamping and stuff I'm doing these days on Ronin boards. But this is like maybe one of the first ones that did have this bottom stamp that was, kind of double angled off like this. So, yeah, pretty stoked on this board. I definitely have some good memories of riding this on the North Shore of Oahu as well. It made the Hawaii trip. So yeah, that's I guess that's probably where I'm going to leave off my personal boards for today. I have a few more definitely before the end of the tubes run, so there'll be a few more maybe next week we can look over too. I'm just reviewing some questions here, guys. If anybody has any questions, fire away, man. I'm just going to be answering anything that's in the chat window. So if anybody has any questions, fire away. Okay, Alexandra, you're asking, some people are using DK for DK are using fins. What do I think about fins? Could we use them for prone surfing too? Well, yeah, I definitely think it just depends on what you're looking for in your board. I think that everything has a positive and a negative. So it just depends on how you want your board to perform. But yeah, I actually have a personal, and I've showed this one, let me grab it. It's right on the corner. So this board is it's a Ronin board, right? But it's 3 to 6 channel. This is my personal prone vector board. So this one has a thruster setup. It has a double plug here. Basically, is the more modern FCS plug. It's the only one I've ever done use these plugs. So I really think these small round ones are a little bit better setups. I usually just install these plugs. I'll just put 2 of those plugs here. But I rode this board with every type of vector fin that they make, and experimented with all the different fin shapes and whatnot. So yes, you can definitely ride skeg boards for prone. It's definitely a possibility. The benefits, though, I mean, it holds like mad, and you might as well give. I mean, you can still spin if you want, but it's a heck of a lot more work to do any kind of spins once you start putting skegs in there. But you're not putting skegs on the bottom of the board to spin. You're putting them on to hold in really heavy situations. That, at least when you're proning, I can only see a benefit to having skegs on the bottom of your board when it's really, really heavy situations. Other than that, it's not really. I think for me personally, this is my own personal experience. Somebody else might have a different idea about what it might work in smaller conditions for certain reasons. But for me, I can feel the drag of those fins on the bottom of my board. That's the first thing for me, is because I'm so used to having smooth channels and single concaves on my board, or multi-channel systems on the bottom of my board, and they track so well, but they're so smooth. And as soon as you put something on the board, I could feel initially I could feel the drag. So you're talking about, you have to give up. If you're going to give up some speed because there's some drag, you got to be in heavier situations to compensate that, where speed isn't an issue. So, but you just need your board to hold, and you got to make that section, because you're going to die if you don't, because it's so big and heavy. I think that might be a one time when proning with skegs might be a good thing, at least in my mind and my experience. It might still have some benefits in smaller ways, but I think that for proning and skegs, it might be better for bigger conditions, when you just need to point your board straight, hold a line, no side slips, no skipping out, none of that. You just need to make the corner. So yeah, there's probably some benefits for prone, but it's a trade-off for drag versus hold. So that's kind of where, at least my opinion on it. Yeah, I think for DKing is a whole different thing. I think DKing, it works for any situation, because side slip when DK is your enemy, man. Because what happens as soon as you let go with your hands and jump up on your knees for DK, and you're not holding on to your board, you're losing some control on your board, right? Because you're not physically holding onto it. You're up on the top of it. And then the side slip motion is you can wipe out and side slip way easier because you don't have the control of holding on to it. So once you put skegs on the bottom of the board for decaying, and whether it's, goofy or regular, we do offsets kind of nowadays, depending on whether you're a goofy or regular. There's some real benefits to eliminating the side slip entirely when you're decaying. So it really is a real benefit for decay. I'd say way more, and it's more versatile. Even in smaller conditions, it's going to stop you from side slipping, even in smaller conditions. I mean, it's going to do the same for proning, but I think, like I said, when you're proning and you start to side slip, you can easily compensate. I mean, you can too if you know what you're doing in decay, but once you start, I know just from the little bit of decaying I've done, is as soon as I get up there and I start to side slip, I'm usually falling over on my side or on my face or something, just because it's hard for me to compensate, because I'm just learning how to decay, even though I've been proning for over 20 years. It's just once I start side slipping, it's game over. And putting skegs is going to completely eliminate that. You're never going to side slip, really. So there's definitely some benefits to plugs and skegs for the right situations and for how you want your board to ride. I want to maybe get into a little bit. I know we've got 20 minutes left or so. Maybe about some different types of rails and different types of rail ratios. I know I kind of want to just touch on that a little bit. And if anybody's got any questions as I'm going through this, feel free to fire away. I mean, you can see, most rail ratios these days are that 60-40 that everybody talks about, right? So, that initially the rail ratio, when we're talking about when it comes to the rail ratio, when the 60-40, what do those numbers represent? It's a percentage, right? So what it is this: say if your board is 2 inches thick, from measuring from the surface to down should be 40% to the point here, and then you should have 60% on the bottom. Now, some boards, you've heard the term 50-50 or 55-45. Those are just different rail percentages, right, of the total thickness of the board. So that's what 55-45, 60-40, 50-50 all mean. Now throughout history, as far as rails, different types go, they're, in the back in the OG days, when they're just mass pumping out boards, I pulled this out. Oh, this is another board in my collection, vintage collection. It's an old school Mach 77. It's old school. It's got the embossed logo, so it's pretty dated. But you look at these boards, and they just have you look at the rail ratio on this thing, and it's almost 80-20. It's crazy how much less chine it has and more bottom rail it has. A lot of the old Morays I've noticed, and I've held a black bottom one too that was even more extreme. It was like a 90-10. It was ridiculously a huge bottom percentage versus the top chine. And also these boards, a lot of them in the old school days, they just put a single rail piece on too. So that's, over time they realized that the rails were getting beat up, and it would be a lot better for durability if not only they put a single rail piece on, they go and put another layer over top of that. And so over time, people started learning to avoid some customer service issues, to add some bumpers in, add a second rail on, and then that all helps with impact damage around the edges of the boards, right? So all the boards you see these days, the higher end ones, all have double rails. All the boards should really have bumpers too. It just really makes for a better, more durable board. Now, and also, as rails evolved, obviously the Ben Severson type of rounded rail thing came into play. And I know there's a lot of people out there that love that, but it's really hard to find those boards because, number one, they're kind of a material waster, number one. They're kind of a material waster because you have this, when you laminate the deck on, normally, now modern board design, you just take the deck skin and you round it over the chine right here, right? So you're gonna take the big skin that's way bigger than the board, and you trim it off, and then you roll the deck skin over this chine. But if you have a rounded rail situation, it's a whole different type of technique of building the board. So here, you put the steps are put the bottom slick on, put the deck on, round the rails over, round the nose and the tail. If you're gonna work its tail piece, this one has a rounded tail, this one has a rounded nose, right? So you're gonna take the skin, you're gonna round it over all those surfaces, right? And then after you get that, then you still have the bare rail out here, and you're going to sand and clean this edge up, and then you're going to put one rail on, you're going to put the second rail on, right? So that's the typical type of modern construction. Just here, many boards built just like that. It doesn't even matter the manufacturer. It's pretty much just the industry standard. So now, as far as the rounded rail thing goes, there's, back in the day, and it gets down to the material sandwich like we talked about, is that as soon as you start incorporating different types of materials, you have to deal with the dissimilar materials. But if you're dealing with all PE construction, and like a PE core, PE skins, and HDPE bottom slick, and everything is PE and there's no PP involved, it makes it for a way easier construction because you're not dealing with different types of materials. So I mean, my personal I have a rounded rail board that I personally have, and if you look at this board, I mean, it's a 3-6. I still ride this one every once in a while and break it out, but if you look at this board and how it's put together, the slick went on, right? The deck skin went on. This one has a tail piece, but so it didn't get rounded over the tail. But what I would do now is this skin runs wild. I got to chop off the piece that I would normally roll over that's already part of this. And I got to take that piece that I would roll over and just throw it in the trash can or the recycle bin. But you're cutting off something that could be used. So instantly you're already wasting material. Now what I got to do is I got to cut a rail. This one actually has an inner rail too. So it has an inside rail, and then I stack and put a second rail and wrap it all the way over all of this, right? So now I have to cut the outside rail piece much wider than I would need to just do the one rail face without having to wrap this over. But I cut it off, so now I got to wrap everything. So you're using twice the material you need just to get the rail done. And to me, it's a material waster. So I mean, I'm willing to do it because it looks cool, but not to mention just to get this all bent and around, especially around the nose sections, it tends to be really hard construction wise. And I see your question about rail angles, Alexander, but that's another thing about this is that some of the older school bin boards had a little bit less angle in their rails, so it makes the whole process of doing the rounded rail construction a little easier. But the way the old school bin boards were done is a whole different set of steps of how the rounded rail thing happens. And for me, this is the easier way to do it modern construction wise, where I still have the EPP deck skin backing underneath this. So now I couldn't really put the rails on first and then the deck skin. Let me get into the other board. So I've done a couple of them the other way so this board right here, it's kind of more bend style shape. It's a full 6-channel, 6-scallop tail, 3/6 scallop tail. No deck crunchers on this board, but this board doesn't have any EPP deck skin backing, so it's a little bit harder to do this type of a construction because this deck skin is filmed on the backside, so it'll still stick to the PP, but it's not as good as if it has the deck skin backing underneath it. And so in this board, if you look at it and how it's all put together, the slick goes on, but normally you go and do the deck skin side, but you don't really want to do that with the traditional bin style board. You want to put the skin on, the slick on, then you put the rails on, and then you laminate the deck skin across that. So if you look at this one, it actually, if you look at how the construction goes, you can definitely tell that the deck skin of this board is over top of the rail piece, where if you look at the other board, the deck skin went on first and then the rail piece goes over that too. So it's a totally different type of technique of how traditionally the bin boards were done, where you put the rails on before you put the deck on. So it's a whole different construction than the way that I've kind of experimented, because I wanted to try to find a way to use the modern materials but still stay true to some of the original types of construction. But it's definitely a tricky process getting those rounded rails on, and I'm not a big fan of doing it just because it's a pain in the butt. And I've had some issues doing it in the past, and the last thing I want to do is be making building boards even harder than what they already are. So I don't do too many rounded rail boards just because I try to stay away from it. I'd rather stay more traditional rails because, number one, it's a material waster, and number two, it's just harder to build them. It's just, and what are the benefits, I mean, the rounded rail boards to me, because like I said, I've ridden my personal one, this one here, quite a bit actually, and I really like it. It's really flowy, but when you put it on rail, it has a certain flow to those rounded rails that it's really hard to put the words, but it's not as bitey as like what some of my other boards would be. Which I don't really have right out here, but I should go grab one just so. But we've talked a little bit about the channeled rails that I'm doing on all my boards. There's the standard like type of doubled railed, roll the chine over, put the 2 rails on, but you channel out the rail face before you put the rail skins on, and you get this little channel on the bottom of the board. And that really, to me, that's my personal favorite rail type of construction, just because it creates quite the point. And that point, and then the rail within the channel, when you get it on rail, it just tracks and bites into the wave so much better than. It's not as flowy, it's really bitey, but I like that feel. I want my board to hold, no side slip, especially when the wave face gets steep. That's when you start side slipping out, and I feel that the channeled rails really just bite into the wave face and track through. So those are kind of some of the basic types of rail constructions. But and another thing people have experimented with is slick rails, and I get quite asked every once in a while about do I want to build some slick rail boards, and it gets back into the sandwich of materials and things that I don't think people realize is that it gets back to, okay, there's 2 types of slicks. There's HDPE and then there's Surlyn, right? Those are the 2 types that are available out there. Both of those have a hard plastic. You got your hard. This is a piece of Surlyn right here. This is, for example. So you got the Surlyn piece here, but what I don't think a lot of people realize that these pieces are backed with types of foam, and that the foam that are put on the back side of these depends on what core you're trying to stick it to. So, like this board, this is Surlyn. But if you look really close, I don't know if it's going to show up on the camera here. There's actually 2 layers of foam underneath here. There's a PE layer and then there's a PP layer. Okay, so all my Surlyn I get back with this type of situation. So you get this extra padding that's on the bottom, but it also has PP, so I can stick straight to PP core just with heat, and I don't need any other adhesive. So it's always good when it's same materials. So right off the bat. Okay, so now let me just run by. I do have a couple pieces of HDPE, it's a little bit harder. It's a little like it's like stiffer. It's weird. But this I don't. When I get HDPE like this, I only get it back with PE, so it doesn't have the other layer of PP on that. It has the same. If you look at the other piece that I just showed you, it has the PE layer just like this, but then the supplier I get it from will back it again with the PP foam, so that way it'll stick to PP core. This will only stick to PE core, because this is a PE foam here on the back of this HDPE. Okay, so now that we have the 2 different types of slicks and then 2 different types of foams that are backed, it all gets down to like what you're trying to stick it to, right? So if you do it, if you're doing a double rail system, like any board, you're going to put a single rail on first, and then you're going to put another rail on. Well, this is PE skin, so once you put one layer on, you could take the HDPE that's backed with PE skin and then stick that to here, and then all of a sudden you have a slicked railed board that has an inner rail that's a standard PE, but then you'll have that layer of backing of PE foam and then the layer of HDPE slick on the outside. So it's possible to do it, but it's a material waster. You have to really cut up a bunch of bottom slick to be able to, way bigger chunk of piece really because you can't bend and manipulate it around the curves and stuff of the nose like you can with the regular skins. As soon as it gets hard and more rigid, you just can't bend and manipulate the pieces around the corners and the radiuses of the nose. Through the back half of the board, it's really easy to put the slick on. And then you just can't push it around and move it, and you just can't manipulate the piece like you normally would. But you're always going to see that little piece of backing foam that's here, right? So that's just one of the things is that and it's really delicate. I've made one slick rail board, but I sent it out I wrote it a couple times, and then I sent it, and we've passed it around to a few of the Ronin guys to ride it. I don't even know where it's at now. I know it's passed through quite a few people, and everybody seemed to like it, but like I said, it's kind of a material waster when I could just put a regular rail on a board. And what's the benefit? I don't even know that it's any faster. It might be a hair faster than what a normal board would be. But once again, speed comes from the wave, not the board. The board just responds to the speed that is given to you by the wave. So you're never going to go fast on a 1 foot wave. You're only going to go fast on a head high wave. I mean, fast, or bigger. The bigger the wave, the faster you're going to go. It's just the nature of it. So a board can only respond to what's given to it by the wave. Anybody's got any questions, fire away. I'm more than willing to answer anything. So we got a couple more minutes, and I'm maybe just going to run through maybe some of the shaping layout tools that I use is another thing maybe I want to touch on today. I have a few things sitting kind of around me right now that I want to kind of show. I get every once in a while people hit me up and they're like, hey, I want to get into shaping, and what would I need to do it? If you don't have a laminator, you're never going to make a board. So that's the first hurdle. But some of the people, were like, okay, well, I got a square and I got a ruler, and but there's still some other things that you kind of need to lay out a proper board, to lay out all the points and whatnot. I mean, for starters, first and foremost it's just a 48-inch straight ruler like this. It's really one of the things I grab all the time. It's crazy for doing center lines of the board, or sometimes measuring different things, all the nose, the wide point, and the length of the board throughout after the center lines. I use this a lot. And then on the flip side of that, I have a smaller little hook rule that I use that's only a 24-inch one. So if I'm measuring something in distance, these are the only two things I use, is that 48-inch one and this smaller 24-inch little hook. It has little hooks on one side. So I'm a real big fan of just those two rulers. I don't even really use any other rulers. I don't really use a tape measure at all. I just use those two straight rulers when I'm doing stuff. And certain times I'll, for certain steps or cutting skins or do some stuff, I also have an aluminum little framing T-square. I'll break out to make square cuts on deck skins and stuff. Sometimes I'll just line up this with one edge and use my razor knife that I showed you before by just cutting down the edge of this thing. So I use this as a guide to do some cutting and stuff too. But then, so like once you get the points laid out onto the board, like your center line with that long rule, and then your nose, where your nose is going to be, your nose to wide point, and your tail. Then all of a sudden you got to start laying out the nose width and the width of the board, and then the tail width, right? So, what's really helpful is something that's called a shaper square. And it's really cool because it's all split off the center line. So really, when you're laying out all the numbers, everything's based off the center line. So you just line up this big black line, and you go, okay, I want a 12-inch nose. You just mark there's 12. It's like split, so it'll go only 6 inches this way and 6 inches this way, but it reads out as 12 and 12. So you just put a little 12 on here and 12 on here, move it down to the center. Okay, I want my board 22 inches wide. You just go up to 22 and you put little ticks, and then 18 for the tail or whatever the numbers are. But this is a super handy square to do all kinds of work for laying out on the deck of a board. It's also good for checking, like, making sure your board's symmetrical and all kinds of stuff. I also use this to lay out when I'm installing plugs and things like that. It's really good. Everything's based off the center line. So it's like a center rule, if you know what a center rule is, but it's all, it's just a great tool. It's got number marks on the bottom and the top. So it's just a really versatile, great little thing. I wouldn't want to build boards hardly even without one of these things. It really is a great layout tool. Also, a couple other little things, and once you get stuff cut and stuff, and sometimes you need to transfer lines around to the bottom of the board, having a little a combination square kind of like this is really handy too. You can take and transfer lines around the front, the nose, and the tail of the board to get lines to the bottom or the top, just to make sure everything is good. Also, you got a set of digital calipers is really good for measuring thicknesses and things. So like the thickness of the core, when I'm sanding cores and stuff, I'll definitely use a set of digital calipers like this to measure thicknesses of the core. And finish thicknesses, I use that to measure the finish thickness instead of like trying to put a ruler on it and eyeball it. You can just set of calipers will tell you exactly what it is. It's really handy. Alexander, yeah, Corel Draw, yeah. I have a degree in architecture, so I'm really proficient in AutoCAD. I've used AutoCAD a ton, and some of the original boards I actually just drew out in AutoCAD for shapes and stuff and curves, and I've definitely played around a little bit with bodyboard design inside AutoCAD, but it's kind of a dream world working in there, and then you got to make it into reality eventually. So the computer and building bodyboards, it was just not really quite there yet. I mean, I know there's people out there using CNC machines to do shaping, and that's all computer. You're going to do a 3D model of the core, and then you're going to shape the core out on a CNC machine. But those machines are so darn expensive. I mean, I think about how many boards I'd have to make to be able to pay that machine off. I'm just not even close to that type of a number. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's fun to play around with some designs in Corel Draw. I love when, I do like a lot when like a customer comes to me on with a custom board and be like, hey, I got this idea for a board. I put this drawing together. And then they send me some kind of drawing, and then a picture. I always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I don't have to sit there and figure out like all the little details of your board when you can just provide me a picture or a little sketch or something like that. It's really helpful. So I'm always excited when somebody comes to me with a drawing or a picture or something like that, instead of having to bounce 50 messages back and forth about what kind of tail you want or what kind of this or that, or what kind of channels. If somebody just comes with a sketch, it's really nice to be able to have that. And if it's done on a computer, I've had a few customers come to me with like CAD style drawings with all kinds of contours or channel designs and things like that. It's really, really, really is kind of helpful if people come to me with that stuff. I like it, because I'm kind of programmed for all that stuff anyway. Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like I said, I had my own architecture company for years, and I do have a large scale plotter that's 24 inches wide and it's roll fed, so I could actually print out shapes and then take those shapes, off of a piece of paper and then try to put them onto a board. I mean, all that's possible, but like I said, I have set curves that I'm using these days that are just golden curves that are so useful for so many different shapes. It's ridiculous. I can build just about any board with a set of like 6 or 8 curves that I have here in the shop. One of those curves is almost always going to be right for the dimensions that the customer provides. So it usually comes down to the dimensions and where that nose to wide point's at, and how wide the nose is or how wide the tail is, and what curve's really going to work with all the dimensions. Some of the magic of shaping. I mean, but yeah, you might be able to print out something kind of cool on a large scale plotter or something, and be able to transfer all that stuff to an actual board. It might be kind of fun to play around with, but like I said, I don't need to do that these days. I have such a dialed in process that it's not worth my time to sit down on a CAD and try to tweak something when I can just do it in the real world instead of in the imaginary one. So yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much covering all the topics. If anybody else, and it looks like we're just past an hour. So if anybody's got any other questions or anything, fire away. Or if not, maybe we'll start to look at wrapping this up and save some energy for next week. And like I said, if anybody's watching this and missed the live chat, feel free to fire away questions into the comment section, and I'll always answer that kind of stuff later on if you didn't get to watch this live and weren't able to kind of take part in the process. So feel free to comment or whatever. Said I appreciate everybody coming out. So if you're still around, looking forward to seeing you later on in about a week. So I don't know, I might have one more of these. Maybe not, probably not before I see you guys, but looking forward to that. So all right, I guess I'll sign off if there's no other questions or anything. I really appreciate everybody showing up, and been fun. I'm going to try to keep on doing these things like I've been talking about. As long as I can keep on coming up with these cool, some topics and things outside of. Eventually, I'm going to run out of my custom boards. I only have so many boards. I mean, I'm getting close to the end of my tubes run now, so I might once I get through the tubes boards, I'll start to transition into my personal custom Ronin boards, and those are a little easier to keep track of because they're all numbered versus back in the tubes days. I got to try to kind of think back because nothing was really logged in on which one was built at what time. I mean, it's all logged down at the factory. I know that there are sheets and stuff for darn near all these boards in the tubes office. So, and that they'll have all the build dates and stuff on it. But I'm not really going to go back and try to figure that out right now. So anyway, I guess I'll sign off and say ciao for now. I appreciate everybody for coming out and being part of this. So, and thanks for the continued support. And I'll see you guys all next week probably. So thanks a lot. Ciao for now.